In this video, we'll talk about the different ways of registering services. First, we can either use add singleton, add scoped, or add transient that accepts two generic arguments. For example, in this line, the first generic argument is the iBook repository type. This is referred to as the service type or the abstraction type. The second generic argument is the book repository type. This is referred to as the implementation type or the concrete type. So this is like telling the dependency injection container that when a class or component specifies iBook repository as a dependency, supply the class or component with an instance of book repository. Now note that the dependency injection container will resolve an instance of book repository only if the dependency is of type iBook repository. If the dependency is of type book repository, then the dependency injection container will not be able to resolve it. Alternatively, we can have both the generic arguments to be of the same implementation type. So for example, in this line, we can say book service, book service. Now this is like telling the dependency injection container that when a class or component specifies book service as a dependency, supply the class or component with an instance of book service. Now since the two generic arguments are one and the same, we can use an overload that accepts just one generic argument. We can also register services using objects and implementation factories. Let's demonstrate that. Go to our data access layer project, expand the repositories folder, and open the book repository class. Here we see that we are directly creating an instance of the simple book catalog DB context class inside the addBook async method. So the book repository class is responsible for object composition and controlling the lifetime of the simple book catalog DB context instance. Also, it is not possible to intercept our simple book catalog DB context class and possibly modify it without having to touch the book repository class. So let's use the constructor injection design pattern to inject simple book catalog DB context into the book repository's constructor and store the instance in a private read-only field. Also, let's expand the context folder and open our simple book catalog DB context class. Here we see we are hardcoding the connection string inside the onConfiguring method. First, let's copy this connection string. Let's define a constructor for the simple book catalog DB context class that accepts a connection string as a parameter and stores it in a private read-only field. And let's pass this connection string to the useSQL Server method. Now, going back to the book repository class, we can see that we need to register the simple book catalog DB context class in the DI container. And since the simple book catalog DB context class constructor accepts a string as a parameter, and since string is a primitive type, we cannot tell the dependency injection container for every string type pass this connection string. So we need to do something about that. So let's go to our Blazor web app project and open the program.cs class file. Now note that we should always register our simple book catalog DB context class as a scoped service because it is specific to a given request and should not be shared across requests. But to demonstrate registering services using objects, let me use the singleton lifetime for now. So say builder.services.add singleton of simple book catalog DB context. Now this call as such will tell the dependency injection container to supply a new instance of simple book catalog DB context class whenever needed and use it for the lifetime of the application. But what about the connection string parameter of our simple book catalog DB context constructor? The dependency injection container does not know what to pass to it. So instead, we ourselves can create an instance of the simple book catalog DB context class, passing in the connection string to the constructor, and provide this object to the dependency injection container. So the DI container will use this object that we created ourselves whenever a class or component specifies simple book catalog DB context as a dependency. Now we can omit the generic type argument because the type is inferred. But ideally, we should register the simple book catalog DB context class as a scoped service. So what if we did this? Builder.services.add scoped of simple book catalog DB context. This does not even compile. This is because we need to register the service not by creating a new object but by providing an implementation factory. To do that, you can pass in a Lambda expression that takes in an iService provider or SP, and it simply returns a new instance of simple book catalog DB context passing in the connection string. This code means that whenever a class or component specifies simple book catalog DB context as a dependency, the dependency injection container will invoke the passed in Lambda expression, and whatever object the Lambda expression returns, that will be used to resolve the simple book catalog DB context dependency. Once again, we can omit the generic type argument because the type is inferred. Finally, let's discuss how to register open generics or types that take a generic type parameter. Let's say we have an interface called iRepository of T and a class that implements the interface called repository of T. Now, how do we register this? For instance, if we are using the scoped lifetime, we can use an overload of the addScoped method that takes in two parameters of type. So we can say builder.services.addScoped passing in type of iRepository of, type of repository of. In the next video, we will talk about registering groups of services with extension methods.